Imagine waking up one day to a world that's turned blind to the atrocities happening before its very eyes. How would you feel, knowing that a genocide is happening in Gaza, and yet the world remains silent? As we delve into the heart of this topic, we find ourselves in the midst of a crisis that has been unfolding for years. The people of Gaza are experiencing a genocide, a word that we don't use lightly. Our information comes from numerous credible sources, including Business Insider, Time, and Al Jazeera, all reporting on the horrifying situation in Gaza. The death toll is staggering, with thousands of lives lost, including innocent children. And yet, the world's superpowers, the supposed guardians of human rights, seem to be looking the other way. Over 2,000 Palestinians have lost their lives, 500 of them children. The destruction is not just physical but also emotional, as families are torn apart and homes are reduced to rubble. But let's pause here for a moment and reflect on the implications of these numbers. Each one represents a human being with dreams, hopes, and a life that was abruptly and unjustly ended. These are not just statistics, but stories of lives cut short and futures stolen. The situation is dire, with limited access to clean water and food, and a high death toll. The world watches in silence as these atrocities unfold. But why is that? What has led to this global apathy? Is it political convenience or a deep-seated bias that prevents the world from acknowledging and addressing the genocide in Gaza? As we dive deeper into this issue, we find ourselves confronted with an uncomfortable reality. The world's most powerful nations, including the United States, have not only turned a blind eye to the genocide, but have also been complicit in it. The silence and inaction of these nations speak volumes about their priorities and their disregard for human rights. As we dive into this topic, we must remember that we're talking about human lives, not just numbers on a screen. To understand the present, we must revisit the past. The conflict in Gaza didn't just happen overnight. This tale of strife, of bloodshed, and of heartache finds its genesis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The land we now know as Israel and Palestine was once a part of the Ottoman Empire, but the winds of change began to blow with the advent of Zionism, a national movement for the return of the Jewish people to their homeland. In the early 20th century, the Balfour Declaration marked a significant turning point. It was a public statement from the British government, expressing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This was seen as a betrayal by the Arab majority residing in Palestine who had been living there for generations. Fast forward to the aftermath of World War II and the horrific Holocaust. The United Nations proposed a partition plan aiming to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Despite vehement Arab opposition, the plan was approved, leading to the creation of Israel in 1948. This sparked the first Arab-Israeli war, setting the stage for decades of tension and conflict. Over the years, we've seen a series of wars, intifadas or uprisings, peace treaties and ceasefires, each leaving deep scars on both sides. But the situation in Gaza has been particularly grim. The territory was occupied by Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War, and despite Israel's unilateral disengagement in 2005, it still controls Gaza's borders, airspace, and coastline, leading to what many describe as the world's largest open-air prison. The recent escalation in violence is just another chapter in this long, painful saga. Protests, airstrikes, accusations of genocide, displacement of people, and the heartbreaking loss of innocent lives. These are now the hallmarks of a conflict rooted in decades of political unrest, territorial disputes, and human rights abuses. The seeds of conflict sown in the past have grown into a tree of despair and sorrow, casting a dark shadow over Gaza. Let's hope that one day, this tree may bear the fruits of peace and justice. In every crime, there's often an accomplice. In this case, it's the leaders who choose to remain silent. In the grand theater of global politics, silence often speaks volumes. When the cries of the oppressed echo from the rubble of their homes, the deafening silence of world leaders resonates with an unsettling clarity. At the forefront of this silence stands a figure of immense power and influence, President Joe Biden. As the leader of one of the world's most influential nations, Biden's silence on the ongoing genocide in Gaza has been a thunderous roar. His administration, rather than taking decisive action against the atrocities, has been accused of fueling the fire. The U.S. continues to provide arms, money, and diplomatic support to Israel, despite mounting evidence of war crimes. But it isn't just about the support. It's also about the lack of condemnation. This silence, this failure to speak out against the atrocities, has led to a disturbing moniker for the president. To some, he's now known as Genocide Joe, a label born out of frustration, despair, and a plea for action that seems to fall on deaf ears. The question we must ask ourselves is, what are the consequences of this silence? The answer lies in the ruins of Gaza, in the lives lost, and in the generations of Palestinians who will inherit a legacy of destruction and despair. In an era where information flows freely, it's impossible to claim ignorance. The world watches as the death toll rises, as homes reduce to rubble, as families are torn apart. And yet, the silence persists. This isn't just about politics or diplomatic relations. It's about humanity, about standing up for what's right, about lending our voices to those who have been silenced. Genocide Joe, as some have begun to call him, seems to be more than just a nickname. It's a stark reminder of the consequences of inaction. In an era of fake news and misinformation, it's crucial to separate fact from fiction. Let's delve into the heart of the matter, the misconceptions and lies that have been woven around the Gaza conflict. One of the most pervasive narratives is the claim that Israel is merely defending itself, that its actions are justified reactions to aggression. But a closer look at the facts paints a drastically different picture. Former UK Defense Minister Ben Wallace warns that Israel's aggressive tactics in Gaza will not bring an end to Hamas or the conflict. Instead, the bombardment and destruction of Gaza are predicted to fuel the conflict and radicalize new generations. The Israeli military has often argued that civilian casualties are a result of Hamas using civilians as human shields. However, this dismisses the disproportionate amount of power and weaponry Israel holds in the conflict. It also overlooks the fact that airstrikes have been indiscriminately destroying homes, limiting access to clean water and food, and leading to a high death toll. A U.S. citizen named Monadel Herzala, after losing several family members in the assault, decided to sue President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. The lawsuit aims to stop the U.S. from providing more arms, money, and diplomatic support to Israel, alleging that the U.S. is legally obligated to avoid facilitating an ongoing genocide. Furthermore, inflammatory statements made by Israeli officials hint at a pattern of aggression. It's vital to understand that the Gaza conflict isn't a battle between equals, but a heavily armed state against an occupied and oppressed people. The United Nations reports that almost 2 million people have been displaced and almost 20,000 killed in Gaza. These aren't just numbers. They're human lives, lives that have been uprooted and extinguished in what many are now calling a genocide. The truth, as they say, is the first casualty of war. But it's our responsibility to ensure it doesn't stay buried. Now that we've unveiled the truth, it's time for us to act. The situation in Gaza is not just an international issue, it's a human issue, a cry for justice that echoes across borders and resonates within the hearts of those who value peace and dignity. The first step towards making a difference is raising awareness. We are fortunate to live in an era where information can be spread at the speed of light, and we need to harness this power for good. Use your social media platforms to share credible information about the atrocities in Gaza. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Every post, every tweet, every shared article amplifies the voices of the oppressed. Consider joining or organizing peaceful protests. Whether it's a march down your city streets or a gathering in front of government buildings, peaceful protests are a powerful way to draw attention to the plight of the Palestinians. Remember, it's not just about numbers, it's about unity. One voice can be ignored, but thousands, millions chanting in unison, that's a chorus that can shake the world. But it's not just about speaking out, it's also about listening, understanding, and educating ourselves. Read up on the history of the conflict, the political dynamics, the human stories behind the headlines. Knowledge is power, and the more we know, the better equipped we are to challenge misinformation and advocate for change. And finally, consider supporting organizations that are working on the ground in Gaza. These groups are providing much-needed aid to the people affected by the conflict, and your donations can make a real difference. Remember, silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Let your voice be heard. Stand up for Gaza, stand up for humanity.